All right, here we go. Still talking to the coroner, the elected official.
All right, we can have the drop back, please.
All right, please. Please offer the counter for you.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we're back on the record. CR 22211623, State of Idaho versus Chad Guy Daybell. Completed our morning break. Maybe to help move things forward here, Mr. Pryor, I'll note that we have now Defendant's Exhibit 19, which is the entire report of Officer Greenhalgh, including attached photographs. And I believe that's been offered and will be admitted by stipulation. Is that your understanding?
It is, Judge, and that's 19. Is that right, Judge?
Yes. Mr. Wixom from the state, does the state stipulate to the admission of Exhibit 19, which is the entire report, including statements and photographs?
We do, Your Honor.
Okay, that'll be admitted then as a single exhibit. And you can proceed with your continuing cross, Mr. Pryor.
Now, Ms. Dye, as part of your, activities on the scene at Miss Daybell's death, you eventually went back and did a chart or a report as it related to this case. Do you recall that? And part of that is to do a body chart and identify things of significance on that body chart. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and you in fact did that. Did you recall that?
Yes.
If I were to provide you with a copy of the chart, would you recognize that chart? If I could have the bailiff approach the witness. Thank you, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I showed it to you. Okay. And do you recognize those documents?
Mhm.
Are those the documents that you prepared? Previously disclosed to the state on my exhibits.
Any objection to Exhibits 89E and F?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Defense Exhibits 89E and 89F
Can you hear those?
are admitted. And again, two separate exhibits there, Mr. Pryor. It's a body chart.
Can you hear
And
me?
then
Two body charts, Judge.
two body charts.
Testing.
Thank
You
you.
want to have that marked now, Judge, or how do you want to handle that?
Rather not.
I'll have the clerk mark that actually, so we keep it straight.
You're getting your mileage in today. Sorry. You're walking today.
So to be clear then, Mr. Pryor, the top, there's two pages here. The top page you gave me will be E and the bottom page will be F.
Yes, Judge.
Okay.
Now, ma'am, you've had may I proceed, Judge?
You may.
You've had a chance to look at what's been marked Exhibit 89E and 89F. Is that correct?
Yes.
And based on the time that you spent at Mr. Daybell's residence observing Tammy, this is a true and accurate reflection of what you observed on that day, correct?
Correct.
And at this point, there's no changes that you would make or anything that you would modify in regards to this, correct?
Correct.
Okay, Judge, could I publish this?
Yes. There's a light on that device, Mr. Pryor, that'll help with the shadow.
Thank you. Okay.
Every time, Mr. Pryor.
So and let me know when you're ready, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead.
On your left, when you're looking at the screen, and it's the face down figure, up on the arm, we have a term. What is that term?
Lividity.
And blood had gathered there. Is that right? That's what that means?
Yes.
Okay, and then a little further to the right on the same figure, there's another word what is that word?
Lividity.
And then to the left again on the same figure down near the lower part of the back, there's another word.
Lividity.
And then down on the legs, there's another term. What's that term?
Lividity.
So from what I gather from this, there was lividity on her entire body. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. So we weren't able with lividity, you aren't able to really make a determination other than the fact that she was laying flat at some point, right?
Yes.
Or she was laying on her front, one way or the other, right?
On her back.
Okay. So in your report, when you discussed this with the FBI, you had, based on all of your experience, you had said that the body had been dead for about 5 to 6 hours. Do you recall telling the FBI that?
Approximately, yes.
Okay, well, you said 5 to 6 hours, so that's what you testified to the FBI. Is that incorrect?
No.
Okay. So I guess the question is that Mr. Daybell mentioned that he was awoken by the fact that Tammy had slipped out of the bed when he pulled the covers. You recall that?
Yes.
And Tammy had fallen down and her head was on the floor and her leg was up on the bed. You recall that?
That's what I was told, yes.
Okay. So if Tammy had died in the bed and had passed away in the bed, this lividity would be consistent with her dying in bed on her back, right?
Yes.
And if she fell down, and that's what woke Mr. Daybell up, there wouldn't be lividity up in her head, would there?
No.
So when Mr. Daybell told you that he was awoken when he pulled the covers, rolled over, and Tammy slid off the bed, well, that's consistent with the lividity here. She was in bed. She died in bed. And when he pulled the covers, she slid off. So wouldn't his story be consistent with the lividity findings that she actually was in bed for 5 or 6 hours?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to go over to the other side and the one that's facing. And on that particular one, it says something about tinged foam. Could you read that for me?
Blood tinged foam.
Okay, and that's what you observed on her body and we saw the pictures of the blood tinged foam in her mouth, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then further down on what would be her right arm, you put a word, 2 words there. And what are those words?
Old bruising. Old bruising.
Okay, so old bruising. Now, you didn't put new bruising, did you?
No,
You didn't put any marks on anywhere else on her body, right?
no,
And as part of your investigation, you by statute are required to do a thorough investigation of the body. Is that right?
yes,
And you did that day, didn't you?
yes,
And what you came up with is that she had some foam in her mouth and there were some old bruises on her right arm. That's what you came up with, right?
yes,
And you came up with nothing else on her body that showed any indication of any other trauma, marks?
No.
We could take that one down. I'm done with that. And Judge, at this time, I'm going to want to publish defense, it's Defense Exhibit 19, I believe.
All right. Give me a moment.
19F, Judge, I'm sorry. And Judge, this is the one where we, counsel.
Sorry.
This is just.
Mr. Bailiff, would,
I'll clarify. I'm not sure. Just mark that whole. All right, again, Mr. Pryor, the way we're admitting and have admitted Exhibit 19 is just a single exhibit. So you can reference photographs contained within 19. They're not going to be given separate designations. So 19F is not going to be an exhibit. So you'll have to refer to it by, I guess, page number, because that's the way it came in as one document. We're not going to have the sub documents in 19. It's just one exhibit.
and Judge, unfortunately, there are not page numbers on these.
Okay, well, if you,
I can identify it as,
you can describe it or count through the pages, but
Okay.
it's one single exhibit.
and Judge, this page number is a photo of Tammy Daybell's right arm showing some discoloration.
Okay, and we've got the original exhibit here that's getting processed. We'll get that over to you here shortly. And you can publish off that court's.
Judge, I've also got it on my screen. Could we do that by HDMI?
You could do that as well if that's a
So would
accurate.
you approach and look at this to see that it's a true and accurate same one, right? And Judge, counsel has acknowledged it's the same picture.
Okay, as long as it corresponds with the actual exhibit, Exhibit 19 is admitted. It's the paper document of the entire report with the pictures. If you want to select one of the pictures to publish, we'll do that. I understand this is also a photograph, death scene photograph. The court's not going to publish to the public. It's going to be published to the jurors and the parties only based on a graphic content.
Your Honor, may I have permission to stand here during this part of the cross-examination so I can have a vantage point for the screen?
You may.
Oh, it's up there.
And they're all just
Magic.
looking at the picture.
So ma'am, you're looking at what's part of 19, Exhibit 19. Do you recognize that?
yes,
And the old bruises that you were talking about, are those reflected on the two what look to be discolored marks on Tammy Daybell's arm?
yes,
And that's what you saw on that day, correct?
Yes.
And those are the old bruises that you talked about that you identified on her body on that day, correct?
Yes.
Okay, Judge, that's all I have at this point with this.
All right.
So you testified earlier and you used the words, if I don't deem it necessary. If I don't deem it necessary that an autopsy is done, it's my decision alone to decide whether an autopsy is done, correct? Your decision alone to decide whether an autopsy is done, correct?
It's ultimately my decision.
Right.
Yes.
And you looked at these old bruises that you identified, correct?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And you looked at the foam coming from the mouth, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I didn't see any other marks or any other indication of anything other than the lividity that you talked about, correct?
Correct.
And based on that, you then issued a death certificate, right?
Yes.
Now, before you issue a death certificate, you have an obligation, do you not? Before you issue and sign that death certificate? Are you aware of your obligation?
Yes.
Okay, and that obligation is that you want to attest, but when you put your signature down on that death certificate, you want to be sure that what you're signing is true and accurate to the best of your ability based on the information you have at the time of the death. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point, the death certificate, and Judge, I'm not going to publish Exhibit 20, but Exhibit 20 reflects that death certificate. You talked about pulmonary edema, and then there was another cause for this, right? Another reason why you cited her, two things that you cited as part of what you felt was her death, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you did talk to Chad, and he talked to you about the fact that Tammany vomited the night before, correct?
Yes.
And you had mentioned about the stomach. Was that stomach completely full?
No, not completely.
Right. And were you aware, when you were there, did you talk to Garth about the fact that he bought Tammy a quarter pounder and some French fries that night? Did you discuss that with Garth?
No.
Okay. But when you went through the autopsy, you found potatoes in her stomach, right?
I didn't identify it.
Okay.
I just saw the stomach contents.
Okay, but you weren't able to identify that there were potatoes in her stomach.
As the
And
elected
And you didn't
coroner.
identify the fact that there was any sight of a quarter pounder or anything like that, correct?
No.
Okay. So when you said that you found it unusual that her stomach was full, it wasn't really full. It just had contents in it. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So we really don't know whether Tammy Daybell threw up that night, other than the fact that Chad said she did, right?
Right.
Exactly.
And when you showed up, Chad Daybell is sobbing, he's crying, and he's telling you how his wife threw up the night before, correct?
Yes.
Went to sleep, and she fell off the bed. And based on the lividity, his story is consistent with what the lividity findings you had, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also had an opportunity to look at Officer Greenall's report, correct?
Yes.
And you saw that the number of medications that Tammy Daybell was taking, correct? Do I need to refresh
Yeah.
your recollection with it again? Do you need to
No,
see it again?
I saw it.
You saw it? You sure?
Yes.
So on page 1 of Officer Greenall's report, and the comment was that they're on the table every morning and she takes them to help her. You recall seeing that in Officer Greenall's report?
Yes.
And you discussed that with Officer Greenall, right? You discussed what Tammy Daybell was taking as part of your investigation, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay, so you're aware that she was taking Fluoxetine, thank you. Fluoxetine, which is Prozac.
Yes.
She was taking acetaminophen. She was taking ibuprofen, right? Vitality extracts, immunity, energy, grapefruit, peppermint. I'm sorry, and I apologize. Vitality extracts for immunity, energy, grapefruit, and peppermint. You saw that as well, right? On the table, right?
I recall it was in the cupboard,
Right. You recall that was in the cupboard? That
the
wasn't on the
kitchen.
table?
not the bedside table, the kitchen cupboard.
Well, when Officer Greenhouse says, Chad showed me all of the over-counter medicines she takes, she said she has approximately 10 bottles on the table every morning. So would you be mistaken possibly that Officer Greenhouse must have made a mistake in her report, or do you possibly, you just don't recall correctly?
Doesn't it say in her report, the cupboard?
Oh, it talks about what was in the cupboard and that there were other things in the cupboard in addition to these things. But Officer Greenhouse talks about this being on the table. You don't remember that?
There's a picture of those medications in the cupboard in the kitchen.
Okay. And then equate cough medicine, right?
Yes,
Essential oil respiratory blend, right?
yes,
And then lastly, supplement for bruising and sore muscles. Remember that as well?
yes,
And then there is a reference that most of what was in the cupboard were essential oils, natural remedies, and some pain medication. Okay?
yes,
So this cupboard was full of a number of essential oils, right?
yes,
This cupboard was full of natural remedies, correct?
yes,
And this cupboard was included in all of these things as well. A lot of medicine that she was taking, right?
natural, yes,
And there's no doubt in your mind that Tammy Daybell was the one taking all of these medications, right?
that's what we were told, yes.
Okay. And Chad talked to you about Tammy having minor fits and shaking consistent with fatigue, right?
Consistent with
Minor fits. that were
syncopal
consi-
episodes.
She had,
Yeah, Mr. Pryor, please let her finish her answer before you get another question going.
Just like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
you want me to restate?
Too fast.
Yes, please.
That poor court reporter.
You were told that Tama would have minor fits of shaking, which were consistent with seizures, correct?
Yes,
Now, when you have a seizure, you're aware that you don't need to have a heart condition or a problem with your organs in order to have a seizure, right?
it's in the brain.
Okay. But when the brain is the seizure, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a sign of it in your brain, do you?
I'm not a doctor, so I don't.
Okay. But you made an assessment here based on what you said, and you signed a death certificate saying that this was something other than homicide or murder, didn't you?
Initially, yes.
Okay. And then her daughter Emma talked about her mother was trying to take clogging classes, but then in the last month or so wasn't able to keep up and was having some difficulty as well, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And there was some discussion that Chad was in the temple, and that's part of his faith. I guess we previously talked about a temple, and that's somewhere, I guess, where you practice your religious faith.
yes,
And during that time while in the temple, she fainted while she was kneeling down, right?
yes. When she went to stand up, yes.
Right. And there were other instances where she was having health issues and balance problems as well that were vaguely referenced in the report, right?
Yes,
So based on the fact that she had seizures, based on the fact that those bruises were nothing new or recent, there was nothing on her neck or face that indicated that she was smothered, choked, or anything like that. You made the determination that there was a medical reason for why she passed away, correct?
yes,
Now, that all changed though, right?
yes,
And then at some point, you received a call from some police officers in Arizona. right?
Yes.
And they said, hey, we got this situation with Lori Vallow, right?
Yes.
And we got another situation with Lori Vallow and Alex Cox related to the name Brandon Boudreau, right?
Yes.
And the first situation was with Charles Vallow, right?
Yes.
Did that officer happen to tell you at that time that Chad Daybell isn't implicated or involved in any criminal proceeding um, against either of those folks? Was that told to you at that time?
That, yes, Chad Daybell's name was mentioned with Lori Vallow.
Yeah, but did they happen to tell you that they're not pursuing any charges against Mr. Daybell at that point?
No.
Okay, so that was left out when they talked to you about looking into this thing, right?
Yes.
And then at that point, based on your previous observation of foam in the mouth, right?
Yes.
And the lividity, right?
Yes.
And what those police officers told you when you had your discussion with them, right?
Yes.
At that point, you decided maybe I need to look into this thing a little more, right?
Yes.
And at that point, you helped with the officers getting an order to exhume Tammy Daybell's body.
Yes.
Did you start an inquest per statute into this matter?
I can't answer that.
Well, you can, because did you start an inquest? You read the statute. If there's an allegation someone has been murdered, homicide, suicide, you have the option to start a public inquest.
Hold on before you answer. Grounds.
Council should not be interpreting the law at this point, and I don't know if she's able to draw the legal conclusion.
It's a yes or no question, but to the extent it's calling for any legal conclusion, it's sustained.
Okay, well, yes or no? Did you start an inquest?
No. No.
Instead, what you did is you started working with the police officers and the prosecuting attorney on it.
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
At this point, you then notified the police that you wanted her body dug up, right?
There he
At
goes.
that point, we were working with the FBI and
Okay.
police from different locations.
Oh,
Yes.
so the FBI was involved as well, right?
Yes. I
Okay.
believe so.
And at that point, there was an order to have Tammy's body removed from the ground, right?
Yes.
Now, as part of your your duties as a coroner, isn't it true that you're also supposed to notify families in regards to any death or suspicious death and let them know what's proceeding in these matters?
I believe that was done.
It was done?
I believe it was.
Do you know what family members they happened to mention that to, that they were digging their mother out of the ground?
I don't recall which ones. No.
Okay. And it was your duty to do that, so you don't recall your duty of having to notify them that they're digging their mother out of the ground, right?
I work closely with the investigators
Okay.
through the sheriff's office, our detectives, and
And I didn't ask you about what you did with the investigators, ma'am. I asked you whether you told the family you were digging their mother out of the ground.
no.
There he goes. No one told the family.
Was there any other reason you were looking for what, a reason for why Tammy Daybell could have died other than what you said about the lividity or anything else? Was there any other thing, other suspicious circumstances you were looking for?
At the time of her death, no.
And at the time of digging her up, were you looking for something else?
Yes.
What were you looking for?
Homicide.
Suspicious activity, anything that would result in homicide.
There you
Okay.
go.
And that was after talking to the police, you were looking for information that would help maybe convince you to change your report to something other than natural causes. Is that right?
After several things happened, yes.
Well, I'm not talking about Brandon Boudreau or Charles Vallow. We've already established what that's all
No,
about.
we're talking about the
I'm talking
children.
about the facts you had when Tammy Daybell was put in the ground. It was lividity, and that really was it, wasn't it?
No. I was told about her past health history.
Okay.
And that played into her cause of death, yes.
Did you happen to look on Teton Medical Report and see what her past medical history was?
I did review it.
Okay.
Yes.
So then you're well aware that Tammy Daybell had a history of anemia, right?
Past history, not current.
Right. Well, she wasn't being treated because she wouldn't go to the doctor for anemia. You didn't see any indication that she had been cured of anemia, right?
It just stated her past medical
Right.
history.
And based on your information, there's no indication in any single medical report that, amazingly, Tammy Daybell has been cured of her anemia, right?
No,
Okay. You also saw that she had a family history of heart disease and heart problems as well, right?
family history, yes.
Yeah, family history, right?
Yes,
And you're also aware that Tammy Daybell had a difficulty with going and seeing doctors, correct? She didn't like to see doctors, did she?
correct.
In fact, she relied on homeopathic essential oils and minerals to solve her medical maladies, right?
That's what I was told, yes.
Right. Okay. So based on the other information that you had about Tammy's history, you decided that even though there's anemia and there's a past history of heart disease and heart issues in the family, we were still going to dig her up, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
would you agree with me, ma'am? You were basically going on a fishing expedition looking for a reason to change.
Objection.
Objection.
Argumentative, Your Honor.
Ugh.
You were basically looking for some reason to dig Tammy up and try to come up with another cause of death, right?
Objection again. Argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained. Ask a question, please, Mr. Pryor.
After she was dug up and you went into the
And he won't let
and
that
had
go
the
away.
autopsy done, right? By the way, where was that autopsy done?
In Utah,
Where in Utah?
I don't recall exactly
Okay.
where we were.
But you were in Utah somewhere, right?
Yes,
And Judge, if I could just have a minute.
You may.
That's all I have.
All right, Mr. Wixom, redirect.
If I may, Your Honor.
Mr. Bailiff?
How's he going to redirect? Is he going to be? Yeah, but okay. So she's an elected official. I have personal issues with that. I think a coroner should be someone who has medical training. So I don't know. The fact that she was an elected official kind of sets her up.
Ma'am, do you recall being asked several questions about what your legal responsibilities are as a coroner by the defense counsel?
yes.
With respect to your duty to perform an investigation, will you please recount what steps you took in your investigation originally at the time of death?
I asked for medical history for Tammy, looked for medications. We also looked in the bedroom, in the nightstand drawers, for anything that would be suspicious. And then Officer Greenhalgh and myself and Deputy Wilmore also spoke with two of our detectives. And Officer Greenhalgh was told just to take some good pictures and document well.
And in fact, pictures were taken. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were you present when those pictures were taken?
Yes,
Did you provide any instruction as a coroner as to what pictures to take or how to take them?
yes.
Do you recall anything else you did as part of your investigation? Let me ask this. Did you attempt to talk to Garth about the circumstances of his mother's death?
I mostly just talked to Chad and Emma. At the time, Garth was just very quiet and just would nod when we would ask him questions or when Chad would respond. He was just really quiet.
And with respect to a number of the questions,
Mhm.
you continued to tell the jury, that's what I was told. Do you remember responding in that manner?
Yes,
Who was the person on scene that was primarily providing you with all the information that you were relying upon?
Chad
Chad
Daybell.
Daybell.
And at the time, did Chad bring up any issues about his connection to Lori Vallow?
No,
Did he bring up Alex Cox's name?
no,
Did he bring up the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux?
No.
Defense counsel made clear that you had estimated an approximate time of death, roughly 5 to 6 hours before you arrived on scene. Is that fair?
yes,
Likewise, you were asked questions about finding a number of supplements and other over-the-counter prescriptions on scene.
Yes.
Was it even possible for you to ascertain how long those items had been on scene before you got there?
no.
Did you get any other information from Chad to verify that in fact she was taking those supplements and they had been on scene prior to her passing?
I did not.
Do you think it's possible that someone else could have put those supplements on scene before you arrived?
They could have, yes.
You were asked about your duties to provide an accurate death certificate.
Yes,
And in fact, you did file an original death certificate and then a second amended certificate.
yes, correct.
Why did you file the second amended certificate?
The results of the autopsy, and 2 other dead children at the same residence.
Yep.
What other dead children are you referring to?
JJ and Tylee.
Did Chad volunteer any information about those two at the time?
No,
When you filed the amended certificate, were you doing that as part of your duty as a coroner?
yes, I was.
And explain that. Why? How is that a fulfillment of your duty?
That was the conclusion of the investigation.
You were asked several questions about the bruising that was observed on Tammy's arm.
Yes,
Do you have any qualification as you sit there today to determine the age of bruising?
it looked old to me, but I don't have the expertise.
And in fact, during the autopsy that you observed, did the ME provide any information about that?
Judge, I'm calling, calls for medical conclusion, calls for hearsay, and there's a lack of foundation.
Sustained.
But as you sit there, do you have any reason to think you have the ability to say whether they were old bruises or fresh bruises, you personally?
Me personally, no.
You were asked some questions about your duty to inform family if you feel like there might need to be further investigation and an exhumation. Do you remember that question?
Yes,
And why didn't you do that?
I don't recall. I don't.
Do you remember what you told the defense attorney a few moments ago?
Our detectives and officers, I believe they informed the family.
So that was your understanding at the time.
Was my understanding, yes.
Were you ever given any information from law enforcement about how cooperative the family was during the course of the investigation?
Judge, objection.
Oh,
I just asked this to be,
They're basing the response on hearsay, and the only way they get that is through hearsay, Judge.
Yeah, the question was she given information? It's eliciting hearsay, Mr. Wixom. It's sustained.
may I argue on that, Judge?
No, I made the ruling, so ask another question.
family was uncooperative. It's so gross.
You indicated that while you were on scene, I think your words were that Chad was sobbing and crying.
Yes.
And is it fair to say that different people have different emotions when there
Yes.
is a grief situation? Were you able to observe or get any information about whether or not a few weeks later when Chad was marrying Lori Vallow, if he was
Judge,
crying or sobbing?
objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Is it fair to say that when you were asking these questions on scene about Tammy's health, that Garth didn't give you any information about her health?
No, he didn't. Only that he was sharing her fluoxetine prescription with his mom.
And again, you've already testified about the reasons for your change in the amended certificate.
Yes.
And that was based upon you being at the autopsy.
Judge asked and answered.
I'm just,
Overruled. Go ahead.
you already explained you attended the autopsy.
Yes, I did.
Is there anything else as you sit there today that you can explain to the jury that you learned from that autopsy experience that helped support your decision to change the death certificate?
The expertise of the medical examiner, and the investigation that was going on. Into other deaths and
Anything further? Anything else? Your Honor, I don't have any further questions.
Judge, there were some new subjects brought up about Alex Cox, Lori Vallow, as well as supplements on the scene and that when those arrived. I think I ought to be allowed to at least inquire on those two subjects.
On the supplements on the scene, I'll allow that. On the other topics, I think that was within the scope
Okay.
of cross. So just on that limited point made by redirect on the supplements, you can recross.
Yeah, she's totally out of her wheelhouse. But I think for like small towns,
Ma'am, do you recall about what time the call was made, the 911 call was made?
I don't recall the exact time it was made, no.
But you did say that you dispatched your deputy coroner, Tammy Wilmore, to be there because she could have gotten there within 10 minutes, right?
Correct, yes.
And the purpose for that is that she lives, we're not going to say the town, but she lives close by this residence
Yes.
and she could get there relatively quickly, correct?
Quicker than me, yes.
So when the dispatch 911 call was made, Miss Wilmore was there within 10 minutes, right?
She was in bed when it happened, so probably not 10 minutes. She had to get dressed and gather her stuff and respond to the scene, yes.
But you were there within 20 minutes and she arrived before you got there.
I said approximately.
Yeah. So prosecuting attorneys suggesting that someone ran out and bought a bunch of supplements staged this thing and within 10 minutes of Miss Wilmore arriving, planted all of this evidence. That isn't very realistic, is it?
Could have happened before,
Okay. All right. Fair
days
enough.
before.
Fair enough. Thank you, Judge. Nothing else.
All right. That concludes the testimony then of Coroner Dye. Is the state seeking to recall the witness in the future? From the defense?
And Judge, Miss Dye is under subpoena from my office, but I'm releasing her from that subpoena today.
Okay, so that does conclude your testimony for the trial. You can be excused. Thank you for appearing. You can go ahead and step down from the witness box and we'll gather anything that was there in way of exhibits.
Her name is Dye, Coroner Dye. I wonder what her campaign slogan was like. But in those small towns,
All
they
right,
have
the
to
state
rely
may
on
call its next
elected
witness.
officials for coroners.
Judge, at this time, the state would call Kelsey Harris.
Yeah. Coroner the, yeah. Coroner there, not Coroner Dye. It is a weird practice to me, though, why the coroner would be elected and not placed, but the coroner Dye. I don't know who this is. This might have been the Utah coroner or medical examiner for the FBI.
All right, the court will note the witness is now under oath. I do have a few questions before we start with the examination. Ms. Harris, have you viewed, watched online, or observed any of the trial testimony that's taken place since this case started?
No, I have not.
All right, have you talked to anyone else about the testimony they've given in trial?
No.
Okay. Mr. Wixom, you can proceed with your direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am. Will you please state your full name for the record?
Kelsey Harris,
Will you please spell it for the reporter?
Kelsie Harris,
And where do you live?
Sugar City.
Is that here in Idaho?
Yes.
Ma'am, do you recall knowing a Tammy Daybell?
Yes.
I want to draw your attention back to October of 2019.
She's a fitness instructor.
Did you have any association or interaction with Ms. Daybell back then?
Yes.
What was that association?
She was a student in my clogging class in
There
Sugar
you
City.
go. There
And
you
she
go.
also worked at the school as a librarian. And at the time, I worked at the school as well.
What did you do at the school at the time?
I worked in the kitchen.
Did you have regular contact while at work with Ms. Daybell?
Yes, I saw her frequently.
Would you, how often during the course of a week or a day might you have? contact?
Every day I would see her.
How would you generally describe your relationship with her?
We were friends. We would see each other at class, in my class and at the school and have conversation more than just a hello.
And you mentioned a clogging class. For the sake of jurors or any of us who may not understand clogging, will you explain what that is?
So clogging is a fast-paced style of dance, and you wear clogging shoes that are
River
similar to a
dance.
tap shoe. It has 2 taps and it creates
Michael Flattery.
loud sounds
Flaherty.
and also different rhythm steps.
And did you say you attended the class with her or you teach the clogging class?
I was the instructor of the class.
To the best that you can you recall what time frame was it that Tammy was
Flatley.
attending that
Michael
class?
Flatley.
It was the end of August, early September until the time of her death in October 2019.
How often was the class held?
It was every week, a 60-minute class once a week.
Did she attend regularly?
Yes, every class.
How would you describe clogging overall? Would it be low intensity, medium intensity, high intensity? Where would you put it?
I would say medium intensity because you're still getting that cardio and getting your heart rate up.
And when students are in the class, do you have the opportunity to observe them?
Yes, I do.
How often do you recall being able to see Tammy in class while she was clogging?
The whole time I'm observing all of the students, making sure there's no falling behind, that they're able to keep up with the steps that I'm teaching. And so I am constantly watching the students that way.
From your recollection, do you ever recall her falling behind in class?
No,
Do you ever recall any issues with her getting tired?
no,
Any issues at all that you recall with her ability to perform the clogging and keep up with the class?
no.
Any fainting? Did she ever faint?
Now, with respect to any other activities, did you have any other activities that you were involved with, Tammy in?
I did.
What were those?
So I attended a high fitness class in St. Anthony, and I stood right next to Tammy in that class, and that was my first time going. I was not the instructor at the time. I was just a participant, and I stood right next to Tammy in that class.
And for the jury's sake, will you just kind of elaborate, what did you do in high fitness class?
So high fitness class is very high intensity. You're doing burpees, a lot of jumping jacks, explosive movements to really get the heart rate up.
And you said you were standing next to her in class?
Yes, I was.
How often was that class held?
2 times a week,
How long was each class?
60-minute class.
Did Tammy, as you recall, attend that regularly?
Yes.
What time frame do you recall attending that class with Tammy relative to her death?
It was about late September of 2019.
And what did you observe, if anything, about Tammy's performance in that class?
Nothing like, so I observed that she was able to keep up in that class and was doing those high intensity moves like the burpees and things like that. And she was able to keep up with that class as well.
And just as a comparison, how different was high fitness than clogging in terms of intensity?
So high fitness is very high intensity. Clogging is still that cardio workout, getting your heart rate up. But as far as like the up and down movements, clogging, we're still moving at a fast pace. And
So just based upon your personal observations overall with what you saw in Tammy in those classes and the interactions at school, let me withdraw that and go back. With respect to your interactions at school and at work, did you have any occasion to observe anything that would give you clues about Tammy's health?
no,
So did you withdraw based upon what you observed in clogging and in high fitness? Did you ever see anything that would give you any questions or concerns about how healthy she was?
no,
Did you ever see anything about her struggling or not keeping up?
no, not at all.
Did she ever express any concerns about how she was feeling?
No,
And at these classes, did you talk to her regularly?
I did. Yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
All right, thank you.
What's Mr. Pryor going to ask? Everyone's private life.